All right. Very good. So we're beginning after break, and we have Lowell Gustafson first. So he is a professor of political science at Villanova University, editor of the journal Big History, and board member of IBHA, including being past president. And he was one of the founders who met in Italy in 2010. Lowell, go ahead.
Okay, well, first of all, thanks, Dave. Thanks to everybody who gave their presentations this morning. Really interesting. I enjoyed all of them. So I want to talk about what I see as the paradox and ambiguity of big history, the complexity of science, religion, and politics over time. Um, and of course, we all know the basic definition that we've used for many years about big history being the integrated history of the cosmos, Earth, life, and humanity. And so on. And then breaking that down a little bit more, the Big History Project looks at the Big Bang, the formation of hydrogen and helium atoms, stars, galaxies, the formation of all the rest of the elements in the periodic table, chemicals in space, including water and all kinds of others. Eventually, the formation, the accretion of Earth, and then the life and humanity. So this is that's the story that we've come to know, which is a fabulous story. I mean, I'm still amazed at that. And there's the detective story that goes with it. All of the people who figured these things out. And the question is for us, of course, what does this mean? I know there's questions about what does meaning mean, but what does this story mean to us? One of the things that the Big History Project mentions is that they refer to the thresholds of increasing complexity, and of course, defining what complexity means is incredibly difficult. But whatever else it means something like the integration of previous units into new units, new combinations of units. So that's one of the themes that's been made in big history for a long time. Another theme is common origins. The newsletter that we used to have was called Origins, and now it's called Emergence, emergent complexity, starting at various origins. The Big Bang is the most obvious origin for everything that we know of in our universe, which is a pretty amazing idea. You've got 2 trillion galaxies or whatever coming from this same whatever that singularity or that point
Fine.
was. Um, and 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 then we have
Okay.
the I guess maybe yeah. Big Bang is the common origin, and then eventually, after we go through the chemicals and the stars and the galaxies, we get to the formation of Earth. And of course, what's been amazing is that we have dates for these things now. I mean, this story of big history could not have been taught at my university when it was founded in 1842. There was no evidence for a Big Bang or even the accretion of the Earth, much less to put dates on them. So to put dates now, 13.82 billion years at the Big Bang, 4.56 billion years for the accretion of Earth. This is astounding work that's been done by the natural scientists. And then the meaning of this, that here we are on Earth, all of us who are engaged in this today, and Earth is our common home. So we have a common origin, we have a common home. We have this fabulous story of the formation and the evolution of life, which we don't have to get into right here. But as far as we know, all life on Earth has evolved from this last universal common ancestor, which is a tremendous story. So we have a common origin for everything in the universe, a common origin for all of us who have this home on Earth, and a common ancestry for all forms of life. And then, of course, we have this evolution that takes place from LUCA to all of the incredible diversity of life, of which we are, of course, a apart, and eventually we get to humans. So the idea of emergent complexity, we start with up and down quarks and protons and neutrons, and then we go through all of this rest of this emergence until we get to 37 trillion cells or whatever it is that make up each one of our bodies. And that's incredible emergent complexity until we finally get to our story. That's the humanity. That's the fourth of the cosmos, Earth's life, and then the humanity. And we have the human story. We have this great migration story. It seems as though we evolved in East Africa somewhere, and starting around 100,000 years ago or 70,000 years ago, we start migrating throughout the earth. The Homo erectus had done that before, but it seems as though Homo sapiens do it originally 70 to 100,000 years ago. So we have that fabulous story, along with all of the other emergent properties of humanity, and where the physical anthropologists, can go over this: the development of communication and language, and symbolic thinking, and social rules and ethics, and altruism, and everything else that goes in to the human experience. Ken Solis was talking today about all the meanings we associate to a flag. It's just a piece of cloth, but we give it all kinds of symbolic meaning that makes a lot of difference to people, and any number of other examples of that. And then the emergent complexity that the natural scientists have provided for us from the Big Bang until the stars and galaxies and all of that, until we get to us. And then we have, and this is finally where my interest in politics kicked in, was what does that have to do with politics? One of the problems with big history for me is I've got to explain to all of my colleagues why somebody in political science is part of a group called history. That's in our silos, that doesn't make any sense. But my sense was that there's a continuity, that human nature is embedded in this natural emergent complexity, and that not only do we have cells coming together to form us in the most complex kinds of ways that the biologists in the medical field can explain, but we have the development of increasingly complex relationships among humans. So we start out in scavenger, gatherer, hunter, kinship groups, which by themselves are complex based on reproductive needs and all of that. We move rather recently to agricultural pastoral villages. And then even more recently to stratified cities and nations and empires. We get into the industrial age and mercantile nations, empires, and globalization. And we have our current digital globalization. So where we're connecting at this point some 8 billion of us, and our conference here is an example of this kind of incredibly complex digital communication, where we're able to use symbolic language to talk among those of us who come from the United States and Australia and Japan and Europe, and we almost think nothing of it anymore. It's just routine. Again, when my university was founded, that would have been absolutely impossible to even imagine. So the bottom line then is we get to this emergent complexity, and that seems to be a very long-term process. I mean, like nearly 14 billion years from the beginning to the end. An unbelievably evidence-based story. In addition to politics, religion is interesting. And by religion, I'm not referring to the major well-known world religions. They're only a few thousand years old. If big history has anything to tell us about religion, it can't be restricted just to the last few thousand years. And I'm fascinated by the root word of religion being liger, like in Indo-European meaning to tie or bind things together. The same root word for ligament, league, obligation, and so on. What are the symbols, the practices, the values, the forces that connect, develop relationship and increasingly complex relationships? Is big history a part of the effort to develop the ties that bind different groups of humanity together and to create the ties that bind humanity and nature together in a process of universalization and eco-culture? Is that part of this long process of emergent complexity, if that's what religion can mean? Uh, uh, my my problem comes from I'm not sure that we are, because big history, the ambiguity or the paradox seems, as far as I can see, it points in the opposite direction at the same time. Instead of emergent, increasingly complex relationship among parts, we have division, separation, fragmentation being part of that story. In politics, at the end of the Cold War, say 1991, there was a book by Francis Fukuyama called The End of History. He just meant that there was no longer great struggles. The great struggle of Nazism versus democratic capitalism was over. The great struggle between communism and capitalism was over, and democratic capitalism won. There was consensus on this. Well, that no longer seems to be the case. That optimistic, if it was optimistic view, has ended, and globalization just seemed to be Americanization, and what we're seeing now is the fragmentation of the American empire and a return to a much more fragmented global political condition that we're having. And the same thing with religion. If religion ties people together within the religious group, it's notorious for dividing people between religions and between factions within religion. So religion doesn't create the ties that bind. It does exactly the opposite. And religion does both at the same time. Politics does both at the same time, and big history does. So instead of, we have the popularity of a multiverse now. Whether or not it's true or not, I have no idea. But a lot of people find the idea entertaining that we have a virtual infinite number of universes with which we have no identifiable connection with at all. There's no complexity with all of these other universities, at least not any relationship that makes sense to me. So maybe rather than being connected with everything, we're completely separate from almost everything except that one part of humanity. Or even if I just restricted to our own universe, which is not bad. What maybe the astronomers can tell me that I'm wrong. I'm sure they can, but really, what meaningful, complex relationship do I have with the galaxy, which is at the edge of the observable universe, much less with all of those that are beyond that? That really, there's not much emergent complexity there within our own galaxy. First of all, when I look up in the night sky, it's great, but I can only see within a few thousand light years, and the galaxy's 100,000 light years across. So I can't even see most of what is in our own galaxy. I can't make out the Andromeda galaxy, so I can see that a couple of times. But most of what I see is relatively close by, and I have what meaningful connection do I have beyond that? And what kinds of communication are we going to have with other planets that are connected? And doesn't this by itself show that big history itself is little big history? We went in our definition from cosmos to Earth. Earth is one virtually invisible planet. Once you get any distance away in our own galaxy, much less in other galaxy, you can't even see Earth. Um, why did we go directly from the cosmos to Earth, as if that was the purpose of the universe? So. Or even the closest star to us in our own galaxy is whatever it is, 25 trillion miles away from us. As I understand it, Voyager 1, which is moving about 38,000 miles an hour, will take 73,000 years to get to the nearest star. What kind of meaningful connection, relationship do I have with Proxima Centauri, except that I can sort of see it with a telescope? So is there emergent complexity there? Okay, so all of life comes from LUCA, which is great. But especially for those of us living in urban areas, honestly, what's the meaningful experience of relationship that I have with all of these life forms, except for squirrels and sparrows and a couple of others? Do I really have a sense of ecoculture, where I find myself in meaningful connection with all of these? So, in any case, is big history giving us evidence for opposite meanings at the same time? There is the meaning of increasingly complex relationships among all of the parts that make me up. My own body, my relationship with my family, with my country, with my cultural groups, so on. And all of that is extraordinarily meaningful to me. On the other hand, I'm also profoundly aware of how separate I am and how fragmented my life is, and that I'm divided from people within my own country based on political party and ideology, between other countries, where it seems as though at least my own country can't get into enough wars at the same time with other people. We love that sort of hostility and fragmentation with each other. We find ourselves very separate from others and suspicious of each other. So is that the political reality that comes out of that? I love David's mission statement, but I'm worried that big history actually does provide the evidence for a more just, I'm trying to remember, a more just, flourishing, and whatever else was he mentioned, world. Doesn't it give the idea of that? Are we seeing greater justice in the world? Are we seeing this? Isn't the evidence there for decreasing flourishing and relationships? In any case, is this an ambiguity? Is big history ambiguous and paradoxical? Does it point simultaneously to increasingly complex relationships, which emphasizes our common origins, which makes me say, yes, I have something, I have really meaningful things in common with all other people, with in fact the universe? When I look up at the skies, do I look at those spaces where a supernova used to be, as the source of this stuff that makes me up now? And so I really am connected to at least former stars, if not current stars. Is that what characterizes my life? That I see myself embedded in all of nature, or do I look out at the same evidence and just see this opposite of increasing fragmentation, separation, and maybe even, if there is any relationship, it's one based on hostility? I think I'm not sure exactly if I've gone on. I think I've gone on long enough. I better bring this to a close. And so that's as much as I've got for us right now. Let me see if I can get out of this.
Excellent. Excellent, Lowell. Thank you very much. yeah, it's within the 20 minutes, so that's good. And so we have a couple of questions, comments already. Stephen?
Yeah, Lowell, very good talk. And yes, this is true. This is kind of part of complexity where it can be what we commonly call nonlinear, where you can have two things happening at the same time. You have convergence, but also divergence. We're seeing that now with globalization, but now that's bringing us all together. But then any conflict in any part of the world is now affecting everybody. Same thing with the internet. We're connecting with each other like now all around the world, but then spending time on social media and you see arguments and terrible fights all over the place. And it kind of reminded me of a point that Jacques Rousseau said in the 18th century about nationalism. And he said, if you try to expand your love of humanity all over the place, it will become so thin that it will become meaningless. So you have to kind of limit it to like the nation or so forth in order for your love of humanity and fellow people to even have any merit. So there is this, and I wrote about this, the history of European nationalism, that there was this kind of complex dynamic between the idea of nationalism, but also this idea of universalism. And I'm trying to kind of look into that issue of like in the history of or the big history of ideas. And I'm kind of going to talk about that in my talk too. But yeah, I just wanted to add some thoughts, and yeah, you touched on some really good points that we could discuss all day about.
Thank you.
Yes, Ken?
Thank you very much, Lowell. It's always refreshing to get someone being negative about something you want to really be positive about. A couple of things, and I'll deal with this first one in my presentation tomorrow. I've come to believe that order and chaos generate each other. That any system will become ordered over time because it finds behaviors that work. And it begins to think that those ways are the way of the world. And then, oh, the world changes. And you begin moving toward disorder until people realize that the old ways don't work. And they have to. And I think that happens in biological evolution and maybe even in cosmic evolution. So that's one thing you hit. The other thing I just wanted to mention that you talk about the things that drive us apart, and they're part of the way the universe is. You know, it may be that the butterfly effect works cosmically. A butterfly flapping its wings in Houston may lead to someone dropping dead of a heart attack on Alpha Centauri. But we don't have the time to find out. So what we do have is now. What we do have is what we can experience given the speed of light. And to that extent, assuming that quantum physics is right, at an atomic level, we are all one single structure. Now, we fall apart. And an interesting book to read. This is by let me see if I can. I'm sorry, I'll put the title. It's a Unified Theory of Evolution. It's by a Chinese scientist who takes it the other way, because in Chinese philosophy, you begin with everything as one, and then it's split into yin and yang, and from yin and yang you have the thousand things. And what he says is what you call highly complex systems are very dependent, fragile systems. So you can look at it either way. I think the biggest problem is we have this desperate need to know why. So we create models that allow us to explain things. But as my mentor, Jack Cohen, used to say, we can explain everything and we can't understand anything. So a number of responses. I just wanted to share that with you.
Good. Thank you. Great.
Thanks, Ken. Todd, go ahead.
Oh yeah, so just just to add to the discussion. Thanks again, Lowell. I think that was really thought-provoking. So I guess a kind of a question for you is, you've nicely identified a paradox, and that's often where deeper understanding arises. So, like the first thought that comes to me is that there's sort of a sense in which we need, if everything is just holistic and uniform, then there is nothing very interesting that happens. So, in order to describe something, we need that ability to break it down into parts, which then opens the way to fragmentation. So, there may be kind of like what Ken was saying, there may be a sense in which both are necessary. But I also just wondered, do you have thoughts about how to resolve the paradox or
Well, I like what both you and Ken are saying in this regard: the chaos and the order, the unity and the separation, and that you know, I got hooked on the idea of through actually by I got interested in the Maya, about that, and when I read the Popol Vuh and the others, the Maya are fascinated by the relationships, the dynamic relationships among opposites, male and female, night and day, life and death. There's always hero twins, and the gods are talking to each other. So there's always this tension and relationship between opposites, as opposed to a consistent unity. I ask my students not to contradict themselves in their papers. The Maya would say, well, why not? In fact, they should be encouraged to contradict themselves repeatedly and to relate the opposite. So it might be that paradox is better than consistency. But that's as good as I can do.
Andre? Yeah. Unmute if you can.
There we go. Okay, thanks. Lowell, the bit of theory I've read about emergence is they talk about emergence, something emerging literally at the edge of structural order and phenomenal chaos. So right there are your two dimensions of evolutionary history unfolding something new. You need the chaos to break the old order, and you need the order to establish a new order. And so it's a dialectic or a dynamic. You need both factors. And you also made me think about Darwin. On the one hand, Darwin did have a kind of progressive notion of morality. And one of the impulses that he had writing The Descent of Man was precisely to show our common ancestry, as you know, and to counter then the dominant racism and imperialism of his day. And then you get somebody like Nietzsche who comes along and is a firm believer in dominance hierarchies and supermen and well, oppression, really, fascism. I think Nietzsche was a fascist. I don't know why leftist French intellectuals think Nietzsche is a great existential hero, frankly. I think he's a god-awful fascist and inspired a lot of fascism. So, yeah, the history of philosophy is struggling with the same issues, as I don't need to tell you. And I do find it fascinating that the dynamic of both factors do generate innovation, but where that leaves us as a species is a pretty powerful question that you're raising, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, thanks. What the little bit I've gotten from about emergency and big history is through Eric Chasen and others with energy flows. That we start out with simple units, and that we expect things to fall apart. We don't expect them to come together, and it's this increasing energy flows, which others understand better than I do, that helps us understand this development of emergence. It's just it just seems to my limited understanding, there's an awful lot that does not become more complex over time.
Sure.
In fact, probably we still have clouds of hydrogen and helium left over from the Big Bang, and they've never developed into anything else. So that's probably the lack of emergence is more common, it seems to me, than emergent complexity. But
I think
also,
no, you're right. I think 75% of the matter of the universe is interstellar gas.
right.
No,
so,
really. Yeah.
So what's all this excitement about complexity? There's not much of it. I mean, happily we're complex, but we're next to nothing.
Well, see, for me, complexity isn't so much about increasing complexity, which seems to me an Enlightenment progressive kind of conception. What's fascinating about complexity is the dynamics, how it describes how things work, totally different from a mechanical approach.
I was also thinking about John Holland's theories of complexity. He's a systems theorist, as you know, as a cybernetic theorist, and he also has that notion how it emerges from the edge of order and chaos. And I also, frankly, have trouble with the language of emergence, because that always seems to emphasize something new, but it also, while it undermines, I think, the notion of continuity. So instead of the word emergence, I prefer the word evolution, because that underlines continuity in a way I think that you're using it, but I don't particularly care for the metaphors of emergent complexity. That's just my own personal.
Hegel's philosophy starts with a paradox. He says, as long as there's becoming, being and non-being is inseparably intertwined. So dialectic is actually, in its language, always paradoxical. To get from the empirical world to philosophy, it is also very interesting looking at the behavior of life forms. If you look at the bacteria, archaea, and bacteria, they never develop further. I mean, they're stagnating. So wouldn't it be correct to think that stagnation and evolution is necessary? You cannot have either alone, but maybe because the bacteria and archaea came first, we need to look at development under this light of some kind of new paradoxical ways, because stagnation is sure something normally people in evolution don't bring up. But without stagnation, we couldn't be here. We wouldn't be alive. And then on top of it, what I find interesting, these bacteria, they also were necessary, for example, to build down lignin. So it took them 50 million years after plants started to build these hard stems and stuff to build it down or something. And they have relevance. We cannot think unparadoxically, basically, I think. But that's maybe is the mistake we always do, because our brains, we want, you designate something and then, oh yeah, this is it. But that is at the same time, it's integrated, but it will disintegrate down the line. We are these kinds of things. The flux that is there is always in being and non-being. And interesting is non-being leaves traces behind. I mean, you see the microwave thing. Well, maybe in a couple of a billion light years, we will never see that again. There's also a time where you can see basically the leftover, the garbage of what these being and non-being processes do to each other. But they are absolutely necessary. That seems to be the craziest thing of complexity. It ratchets up, but at the same time, it stays always in this being, non-being. And One more comment to politics. I find it interesting because I work on these natural disasters forever. We have now, I mean, we figured out there's so many crazy stuff can happen on this planet that we need to figure out maybe with AI how to move into a direction where we say, well, maybe we should stop, going after each other and focus how we can make it here in the long run. Sorry, talking too long.
I like emergent complexity because it distracts me from the fact that there are more bacteria in my body than there are cells. So
No, you need that. It's clear.
I did like the little Hegelian twist we just had in the discussion.
Oh yeah, they have revised the number of bacteria to being about the same as our cells, but it's like the number of stars in the galaxy keeps changing. But sorry, I'm in the biomedical side, so.
Irrelevant facts are fascinating.
Yes, they are.
Bacteria, we live in symbiosis with them. We cannot live without them. Vitamin K, supposedly in the gut, they even now control part of our emotions and thoughts. Bacteria are everywhere. They're with plants can't live without them. And then I guess the funny thing is how this multicellularity even came about. It's basically the combination, I guess, the beginning of eukaryotic cells are an archaea bacteria that swallowed up a bacteria that became the mitochondria or plastid or something. So, and there seems to be a complete black hole from that kind of, from these two tiny bacteria to this gigantic eukaryotic cells. There's some kind of, what happened in between? And it happened only once. So, complexity seems to be really something important, and then how do you explain how this came about? Why would this only happen once? This seems to be another singularity. Right.
I think Martin van Deen wants to speak.
Yes, I would like to make a comment, Lowell, because I don't see the paradox. The way I look at it is that if you look back in time, it's like an going up and down, up and down, up and down. And okay, today when you look around, you could say, well, we are fragmenting and the world is splitting up. But in 1940, you would have felt the same. And in 1917, you also would have found the same. And when there was a big plague, you would have said, well, the world is going apart. It's happening every so many years. So I don't see it as a paradox. I see it as a natural phenomena of the way the world develops. It's not a straight line going up. It's a lot of wiggles, and maybe one wiggle is the end, or maybe there might be another wiggle.
Yeah, good point.
Okay, then.
Ken?
Oh yeah, I got a couple comments. Number one, it's almost trivial to say that order requires disorder because on a physics level, every process outside of experimental irreversible processes, which doesn't really count in nature, it requires an increase in entropy. So it's almost trivial from a physics standpoint that orders requires disorder. It's just a given. Also, complexity, we focus on a progression, and I know some of us are alluding to it, but actually what happens is complexity goes in all directions. If the system does better going laterally, like creating, zebras versus a horse. One's not necessarily more complex. It'll go that way. If it becomes less complex, like parasites become less complex in some ways, just to survive, then it does that. Again, about 40 to 50% of species on the planet are parasitic. And then again, some are some are symbiotic, some are mutualistic. I actually wrote a paper on history of infections and all that, but haven't tried to publish it through JBH yet. But anyway, yeah, and so anyway, it's whatever helps the system persist. It's just, as somebody smarter than me once said, evolution is always exploring the adjacent. Somebody probably here knows who said that, but yeah, it doesn't. It's
Stu
like
Kaufman.
Huh?
Stu Kaufman.
Stu Kaufman, yeah. So yeah, it just explores every which way in a random sort of a method, a strategy, if you will. So yeah, that's enough for me.
Okay. Yeah, sorry about this. That we went over the scheduled time here, but that's because Daniel can't make his talk slot right now. So he helped organize this, but the academic year in Brazil was supposed to be over by now, but they've had different difficulties over the year, and I guess they extended the academic year. So he's in class, he's teaching in class right now, and he couldn't get out of it. I'm trying to get him scheduled for a different slot that he would go. I was really looking forward to his talk. We had some back and forth on it. So I'm just waiting for a response back from him on that. But right now, what I'd like to see, Alberto, you're scheduled next. Would you be able to start early?
Hey, I'm ready.
Yeah, all right, very good. Let me, if you want to get started sharing and
No, okay. I share my. Can I share my screen?
yes, and
I share.
I'll